From vaudeville to the silver screen to the small screen, the Marx Brothers made an impact wherever people found them. Now, Tom Fox and Mike Volkov bring them into the boardroom to help explain and explore the sometimes chaotic world of governance, risk management, ethics, and compliance. This is Why a Duck? Into the Compliance Soup, which is part of the Compliance Podcast Network.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. This is going to be a little bit different series this time on Why a Duck. We are going to dispense with a discussion of the Marx Brothers movie and have a 5-part series on COVID-19 and the role of compliance. We're going to take a look at various angles and perspective, including the board of directors, the CCO, ethical companies, new laws and regulations, crisis management, and leadership. Mike and I have written extensively on this subject, and we've linked to all of our posts and podcasts in the show notes, so I hope you will check those out for additional resources. In our 5th and concluding part 5, we take a look at the role of business leadership and have some final thoughts on the COVID crisis. Hello, everyone. Tom Fox and Mike Volkov back for our final episode in our 5-part series on COVID-19 and compliance. Today, we're going to look at some really I thought dramatic and strong pleas that Mike made for ethical leadership and real leadership in this time of crisis, and then conclude with some final thoughts. So, Mike, early on in this crisis, you wrote about the need for strong governmental leadership and strong business leadership. Why did you make those pleas so early on?
Well, I guess I went back to my love and knowledge around history. And what we're witnessing right now at the federal level is the absence of federal leadership. And it's unfortunate because, and I don't mean to be a doomsayer, but this is a time where a president leads. This is said without any political axe to grind. This is just a pure objective look. Ronald Reagan, for example, was a great leader at times. For example, and I love one of his quotes, "The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted, it belongs to the brave." Or Franklin Roosevelt, who said, "Confidence thrives on honesty, on honor, on the sacredness of obligations, on faithful protection, and on unselfish performance. Without them, it cannot live." And these are 2 great presidents in our history as we look back. And this is absolutely a clarion call for federal government leadership. I think it's probably best perhaps demonstrated by the fact that we have governors or states who are now bidding for ventilators and other products against each other and even against the federal government, FEMA. This is a time where proper planning and exercise at the federal level is exactly what was contemplated in our Constitution. We got rid of the articles of the incorporation, confederation, because of the problems that we had with states running their own fiefdoms. In the federal system, we are predicated on the need for a federal role to protect our entire country from attack. And here there's nothing less than this is a wartime attack on our public health. And this is a time where the federal government should step in, exercise their authorities under their production authorities, and order the production of ventilators, order the production and distribution on a rational basis according to need in terms of equipment, PPE, face masks, whatever needs to be produced. It's just absolutely incomprehensible to me that the richest nation and the most productive nation in the world is having these kinds of shortages around its states. And that, to me, is an absence of federal leadership. Now, what's the lesson for that? It actually, or the consequence of that, besides going into all the parade of horribles with the states and what's going on at each of the states, let's go down to businesses. Every CEO, every board chairman has to be looking at themselves right now as leaders, and leaders with a responsibility to speak with transparency, with honesty, with bravery, and making sure that people know what the risks are and why the company is taking certain actions. This is a time where leadership can be really inspiring. I saw yesterday the head of a pizza chain in the country. It's called And Pizza, where the owner has basically handing out free pizzas to everybody who's working in New York at the hospitals and healthcare and the whole system, as well as continuing to pay all of his employees whether or not they're working. This is a time where a CEO can make a dramatic statement and inspire leadership, because we do have an absence of it right now. And there is a reason why Andrew Cuomo's daily press conferences are so popular, because people are desperate for leadership. So we can start at the federal level and work our way down. To me, it was an absence of leadership that the Florida governor kept the beaches open during the time of the pandemic and allowed people to come into contact with each other. And there's a reason why other countries that put in shelter-in-place orders are actually seeing their curves bend down, while the United States' curve is continuing to rise. And the absence of a national shelter-in-place order, it will also be viewed historically, I think, as one of the other biggest blunders during this failure of federal leadership. We'll learn from it, hopefully, and we'll plan for this so that it'll never happen again like this. But to me, there are lots of people who are going to die as a result. The tragedy, family by family, for each victim is just incomprehensible. And these statistics are just break my heart as I hear about them each day. So I wish we were in a better situation in that sense, Tom. But I fear for the consequences of this and the impact that it's going to have on our country and on our souls and on our culture for years to come.
So, Mike, I interviewed Mike Cherkasky last week, and he's founder of Exeger, and he said something that stunned me, but in retrospect, I found prescient, and that was, this is the worst crisis in America since World War II. And I've been thinking about 9/11 or perhaps other economic downturns that we'd had, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized Mike was right. And that means an entire mobilization of civilian, military, federal government, state government, local governments, and businesses to fight this crisis. And one of the things that I think you talk about a lot is trust. There are others who talk about trust in business quite a bit, and we absolutely have to have trust. Employees have to have trust in their business leaders. Right now, we have no trust in the federal government, either in what they're doing or what they're saying. We do have some of that as we move down to the state and local levels, where governors, county executives, and mayors are giving information to people that they can really readily consume and use. But we have to have a level of trust so that people like you and me can know the right thing to do going forward. And we are going to be tested. And we obviously are very resilient, but our leaders need to step up and give us true leadership in this point. And we haven't really talked about this, but there was one other thing I wanted to throw out in this podcast series, Mike, and it's about enforcement of laws. And you and I work in the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act space, anti-corruption compliance. You also work in antitrust compliance, export control and sanction compliance, and a wide variety of other compliances. Well, those regulators are not sleeping. And 3 years from now, if you find yourself under an FCPA investigation for actions your company engaged in 2020, there is no COVID-19 defense. There will be no COVID-19 defense. Your actions will be judged 3 years from now based upon 3 years from now. And that's just the way FCPA enforcement has always worked in our lifetimes. And the same would be, I would guess, be true for antitrust violations, AML violations, export and control and sanctions violations, so that you must remain ever vigilant because the regulators will prosecute crimes. That's their job, and they're not going to stop doing it during this time. So for the compliance professional, you have to continue to do your jobs. For the leaders of our businesses, of our country, of our states, you have to engage in meaningful dialogue with transparency to all of your stakeholders.
And going back to history and Mike's comment that you mentioned, we've had horrible tragedies in our history, of course. But just to put this in context, during the Civil War, it's estimated that 750,000 Americans were killed in the Civil War. In World War II, it's estimated that upwards of 400,000 people were killed. Right now, we're on a pace to exceed the number of U.S. people who die beyond World War I, and which is in the hundreds of thousands. And I suspect the numbers are going to get closer to the World War II numbers. And I think, to me, that is, and the look back is going to basically see key points where, had we taken certain steps, we could have reduced that number significantly. And for me, what that means is that the absence of leadership has had a serious and devastating consequence. Look, Hurricane Katrina was, perhaps the downfall of the Bush administration beyond the Iraq War and beyond the financial crisis, but it involved the death of 6,000 people in the end who died in Hurricane Katrina as a result of the mismanagement by FEMA. And now we're talking about something on a scale that, you helped to remind us of, about World War II. And that's what is really unfathomable at this moment. So, I commend you, Tom, for this series. I commend you for shedding light on this. And I really just think your voice right now is just an important voice for everybody in our community.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. And if we have listed all of the articles and podcasts that Mike and I have both done on this series, so there's a lot more information, and check those out. Mike, this has been a great series to do with you. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Why a Duck. Make sure to subscribe, and if you enjoyed the episode, leave a review.